Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. Don't forget to go and get that fabulous drink, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. It was the year 1992, or thereabouts. I proceeded on my way towards the new highly esteemed restaurant I'd been hearing raving reviews about, a restaurant in the plush, prestigious area of Mayfair in London, which borders the leafy green park called Hyde Park. It's an upscale area I visit a lot in my line of work. The streets here are gracefully lined with swank upscale Georgian townhouses, exclusive deluxe hotels, ritzy gourmet restaurants, including the world-famous bespoke tailors of Savile Row, high-class designer fashions on Bond Street, and then there's Burlington Arcade, Shepherd's Market, clusters of pubs, boutiques, so yes, you could say it's an upper-crust area. The restaurant I was visiting today, or tonight should I say, was a townhouse that had been converted into an intimate first-class dining restaurant that you needed to book in advance to secure a table, thanks to a phenomenal chef, Marcus Black, with an exceptional superlative reputation that was making waves in London. For a moment I lose my bearings, but my reliable A to Z that I can't live without helps me to find the correct street. All the houses in this block are distinguished, expensive, rather regal-looking, 3 to 5 stories of superior architecture that unblushingly pencil up into the blue sky, with a proud, presumptuous, rather pompous, self-indulgent gait. Let's just say these houses of yesteryear have laid their sturdy foundations in the soil here since the early 17 to 1800s. They unabashedly know that they look good, and anyone who visits this part of London does so too. Indeed, many have flocked here from all parts of the globe to wallow in the full-bodied history of this place, like a hippo in a watering hole in Africa. When you walk down these immodest streets, with the indelible influences of bygone generations that have left their ineffaceable footprints on this place, which can be so tangibly felt, most Londoners are extremely proud of the rich imperishable history you find here, many of us shunning more modern, innovative architectural styles that for us quite significantly lack the quintessential charm and enduring magnetism of older, more stately buildings that have within their secure foundations a personality exclusively of their own. Indeed, they have marinated themselves in the perennial memories of the past, like an expensive wine, so you can taste all the subtle underlying flavours from the woody to the fruity. You can unequivocally appreciate the unique impression these buildings convey, rather like a great work of art, done by a long-since deceased master, that you might find on display at Sotheby's, like a Picasso or a Leonardo da Vinci. Little did I know that this serendipitous day would ultimately lead me on a unique journey to the Americas, that would offer up to me a bizarre, incongruous encounter that not many British people like myself are privy to experience or even know about. For many of us, our natural sceptical natures would subdue us into believing such nonsensical claims could not be remotely true. Indeed, I'm ashamed to profess I would have gladly joined them in their scathing ranks, but it is difficult to ridicule or pooh-pooh something that you've witnessed first-hand for yourself. So you can hardly entertain doubt in those circumstances. For many years I did not dare tell anyone my incredulous story, that is more in common with a work of great fiction that inspires the recruitment of a dramatic imagination. I can't imagine telling people that I'd encountered a Neanderthal-like beast in America, as that would, in my humble opinion, have invited many doubting Thomases to board my ship, that would ridicule and laugh out loud at my absurd, preposterous claims that they would clearly propose were sheer lunacy, the ramblings of someone having overindulged on the hallucinatory effects of magic mushrooms. But I assure you, this is certainly not the case. Looking back, I think I may have had this experience due to my cynical nature, almost as if the universe herself decided to throw a spanner in the works and say, "There you go. Put that in your pipe and now smoke it." Let's just say the experience completely threw me out of my self-contained, rather cosy, comfortable bubble that I'd nestled in for so long. Some of us love to believe the status quo. It fits our lives like a glove, and stepping out of its secure boundaries can make us feel as nakedly vulnerable and conspicuous as a tortoise without a shell. After my experience, I began to see the world in a brand new light, for there is no going back down the old paths, as my view of everything had shifted dramatically. I began to realize, under the vast circular plains of our earth and the scaffolding of the sky, are indeed many clandestine secrets and extraordinary phenomenons some of us are only beginning to comprehend. It is believed that the great Nikola Tesla is said to have mastered the ability to time travel, to see the past, the present and future all at once. I'm open to the concept of portals, time shifts, galaxies, different life forms on other planets and other dimensions, something which years ago I would have had a field day tearing apart with my rigid, stereotype, conventional views of reality. These days, when someone tells me something that on the surface may sound ludicrously bizarre, I'm more inclined to believe them than dismiss their ballsy account. One thing I'd like to point out is that no one is going to put themselves out there and profess to something so idiosyncratic that it just invites abuse and ridicule. I mean, who does that? Unless they thoroughly enjoy being the butt of everybody's jokes, or considered as loopy as a fruitcake. I hasten to say, there are many out there like myself, hanging on to secrets they will never share, and I don't blame them. They're reticent in coming forward to share their extraordinary stories. But in an anonymous medium like this, I welcome this perfect opportunity to share my account with you and your listeners. As is the case with every story, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A perfect sequence of events that glide seamlessly into each other to create a whole. By all accounts, depriving you of one segment of my story would be doing you a great disservice and make the impact of my account so much less punchy, and I wouldn't do that. It would make me a lousy storyteller, failing to do justice to a remarkable account that deserves its full elucidation. The little gourmet restaurant I was eagerly trying to locate, I soon found tucked in the corner of a very quiet street. I observed elegantly dressed diners arriving at the restaurant for dinner. There was a large green vintage-coloured awning on the outside windows, with gold writing on it, similar to the awnings outside Harrods department store. My job as a restaurant critic means I visit restaurants around London and other parts of the UK, and I write up food reviews about them. I hasten to say a bad review from a restaurant critic can be detrimental, damaging to your business. I always try to enter the restaurant looking as inconspicuous as I can. It's important to maintain a level of discretion. On this occasion I'm meeting another restaurant critic called Alfonso. He's my very best friend, but I'm the first to arrive. I hope to give off the impression that we're a happily married couple, which is the quintessential perfect disguise when you're undercover, writing a review under, let's say, cloak and dagger. The trouble is that Alfonso is so gay, with very dramatic effusive gestures. He dresses with such a debonair style. He often just stands out. He'll say things like, "Oh, my darling, let me just say, the food today was just mwah, mwah." Now I ask you, how many straight men actually talk like that? They don't. I remember at one restaurant I'd been to, me and Alfonso pretended to be a happily married couple, and when I retreated to the powder room, a very sweet, rather flustered old woman hurriedly ran in after me. I don't know how to tell you this, dear. You seem like a terribly nice lady." She stumbled over her words. I just think you have the right to know the truth. I believe your husband is a closet gay. I want to tell you this because my husband was having an affair for many years. Years and years, actually, and everybody knew about it except me. I felt like a prize idiot. I don't have any evidence about your husband, dear, but he's got that gay look about him that warrants investigation. I tried not to crack up laughing. Oh, I'm so sorry to have offended you, dear, she continued, but if it were me, I would want to know. I thanked the woman profusely for caring so much. I returned to Alfonso to tell him to tone down his ebullient dramatic gestures, but let's just say it's a little like telling a caged tiger not to roar. Alfonso's gushing vociferousness can be unbridled at the best of times. I'm greeted at the door by a smart waiter, wearing a black bow tie, a white pleated shirt, black chinos, and a short white starched apron around his middle. It's a table for two, I say to him, under the name of Mackenzie. My real name is Sullivan, but of course I don't want people to recognise that name. It might alert them to giving me exemplary service, in order to get a good write-up. My husband will be joining me, I tell the waiter, hoping with all my heart that this time Alfonso is going to play the quintessential role of the perfect husband today, and restrain his impassioned tendencies to gallop into an animated, gushing exuberance. Of course, every woman on the planet, well, most of them, adore gay men like Alfonso, and he is my best friend. Even so, I don't want to experience sorrowful glances from pitying guests at the restaurant who clearly think that I'm a naive, callow London housewife, blindly oblivious, impressionable and ignorant to my husband's homosexual leanings. The waiter leads me to my table, that overlooks a large French window onto the street, where you can see the red brick Georgian houses on the opposite side of the road, and observe passers-by walking down the street, women with their prams, people walking dogs, and men carrying copies of the Evening Standard or Wall Street Journal under their arms, along with bottles of wine to enjoy with dinner, while the odd car rolls down the large ribbon of asphalt. It's a quiet area, where hanging baskets ablaze with colourful blooms serenade entranceways, fringed in by wrought iron fencing, and there are rows of polished front doors with porticos. The oakwood tables at the restaurant are sumptuously covered in pristine, starched white tablecloths, and large wine glasses that shine so brightly they sparkle. You'd be hard-pressed to find a tiny smudge on any of them, as everything has been polished within an inch of its life. If you tap these high-quality glasses, they tinkle like a musical instrument. The restaurant already has a buzzing ambience. The waiter hands me the huge, impressive menu. To my amazement, I find there are rather unusual dishes on the menu that I've never seen in French cuisine before, like Texas-style oven brisket, cheese blintzes, king crab with macaroni and cheese, Greek-style snapper, Cincinnati chili, chicken soup with matzo balls, chicken pot pie and potato salad, and leek and potato soup served with cornbread. It strikes me as peculiarly strange that this restaurant appears to have an American twist. I'm curious to taste some of these dishes, and my taste buds are already drooling with eager anticipation. When Alfonso walks into the restaurant, as usual he exudes his usual charm, gyrating his arms effusively. "Oh, I'm here to have dinner with my beautiful wife over there," he tells the waiter, pointing in my direction. The waiter tries not to look surprised. "That's your wife over there." It's obvious what he's thinking. I didn't expect you to be married to a woman. Far from being that discreet married couple, in the corner at the far table that overlooks the street, the affable Alfonso is already drawing attention successfully to himself, as eyes on the tables of other diners appear to be curiously glancing in his direction, as he elegantly moves towards me. Soon stares are burning into us inquisitively. Alfonso, of course, is looking incredibly debonair this evening. He is 6 foot tall, with a slender, well-toned physique, and a groomed, manicured face that's always dappled with a day-old stubble, as a fashion look, rather than a man being too lazy to shave, for there is nothing remotely lazy about Alfonso when it comes to his appearance. His hair is short on the sides, so that it is almost shaven, and slightly spiky on the front, where it stands up, thanks to an extortionate use of hair gel. I often secretly wondered how much Alfonso actually spends on hair gel a month. He probably gets through half a bottle a day, I should imagine. Today he's wearing a stylish pair of dark wash jeans with a fabulous well-fitting white cotton shirt and a dark blue blazer with only one middle button done up. He's wearing a pair of butterscotch leather boots. A matching bag is slung over his shoulders. "Hello, darling," he says, kissing me affectionately on both cheeks and throwing his arms around me. He pushes me back to have a look at me. "Darling, you look fabulous today. I love the black dress. It suits you." "Shh," I whisper in his ear. "Everyone is looking at us. Remember, you're supposed to be my husband. Calm down. Tone down the enthusiasm, will you?" Goodness gracious, you're like an unrestrained, hyped-up dog that hasn't seen its owner for over a month. People can't help but stare at you, Alfonso. It's your unrestrained, touchy-feely energy. Alfonso takes off his jacket, throwing it on the back of the upholstered chair. "What's wrong with a gay man meeting up with his good friend for dinner?" he says. "Why do we pretend that we're married anyway? I'm sure people aren't buying it." "It would be a great disguise if you learned to keep your arms still and were a little less over the top in your mannerisms." "I will try my best to come across as the perfect husband," says Alfonso, grinning. "So what is your first impression?" he asks me, his eyes scanning around the restaurant curiously, with the piercing perception of a savvy hawk. As Alfonso misses nothing. "I think it's perfectly charming. I really do. Tucked away inconspicuously in a Mayfair street. It's so elegant and stylish. But let's just say the menu is rather curious. I mean, look at this. King crab with mac and cheese. And Texas brisket served with a garden salad." "I agree," pipes Alfonso. "Looks like the French chef here has spent some time in America. This is going to be an interesting journey. A food experience I shan't forget in a hurry." Let's just say that when our meal arrived, even the effusive Alfonso was lost for words, and that never happens, as we tasted the dishes on offer, and the Texas brisket just melted into our mouths. And as for the mac and cheese, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. "I'm in love," says Alfonso, sighing. "What?" I say, looking at him with a baffled expression on my face. "You never told me. Spill. I want to know all about him. And don't you dare avoid missing out any of the saucy details. Do you understand? When did you meet him? Whereabouts did you meet him?" "I haven't met my lover yet," says Alfonso presumptuously, "but I'm about to." To my amazement, he starts waving his arms in the air, like a manic octopus, which causes many diners to give Alfonso a slightly disapproving look. But he's not subdued in his desire to get the waiter's attention. The waiter comes bustling over to our table. "Sorry, sir, and madam," he says politely. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is just fabulous," says Alfonso. "Couldn't be better. Might I have a word with your chef?" "I'm sorry, sir. The chef is very busy right now. But if you have a message, I would gladly pass it on to the chef on your behalf." Alfonso pulls out a notepad from his bag and scribbles a message, handing it back to the waiter. "What did you write?" I ask him. "I wrote, 'I'm in love. Gentleman at table number 8. "You didn't. You didn't write that. You think the chef is going to abandon his kitchen for a note like that? Are you crazy? He'll think you're as mad as a hatter. Besides, what makes you think that he would respond to such a strange note? And how can you be sure that he's actually gay?" "People are curious," says Alfonso. "Wait and see. If he's straight, he'll hide away in the kitchen, bury himself under the confetti of white dishes. But if he's single, and if he's gay and curious, he'll be out of that kitchen faster than you can say, Jack Robinson." What? Are you mad? It seemed Alfonso was absolutely right, much to my shock. As sure as eggs is eggs, the tall figure of the chef emerged from the kitchen, ambling over to our table with a warm smile on his face. I did not fail to notice that Alfonso and Marcus had some chemistry between each other. They locked eyes with each other, and there was an electricity between them, or to be more subtle, a mutual attraction. Although in the case of this chef, he was not as obviously gay as Alfonso. "I hope you enjoyed your meal tonight, madam and sir," he says in a warm American drawl, which catches us completely off guard. I suppose we should have been surprised, given the American influences over the menus. I think we had presumed that the chef was actually French, but we were clearly wrong. "You're American! How wonderful!" says Alfonso, shaking the chef's hands warmly. "I like America, and I love Americans, but I didn't expect you to be American. I'm pleasantly surprised about this. It's a pleasure to meet a man of such consummate, accomplished talent like yourself. Your menu is inspirational, unpretentious, wholesome and nurturing, refreshingly different. I like it. I really like it. Please, will you do us the honour of sitting down?" he says to the chef, pulling out a chair from the table and indicating for Marcus Black to take a seat, which he does so unhesitantly. Alfonso then calls over the waiter and instructs him to bring Marcus Black what he would like to drink. "That'll be a gin and tonic, sir," he says, scurrying away dutifully. "My name is Alfonso. I just want you to know no one shortens it to Alf. Wouldn't dream of it," says Marcus. "My name is Marcus Black." Alfonso's eyes are locked on the chef. He's a handsome man, with blonde long hair that licks against his neck, and blue eyes. He's every bit Alfonso's type, in every single regard. "You're from America, I say. I must admit I thought it was pretty lame to put macaroni and cheese on the menu. But now I have to retract my words. Not only did it work with the king crab, it literally melted in the mouth like butter. But that Texas-style brisket, oh my word, that was something else. I've never tasted anything so good." The chef looks pleased. "It's very good, isn't it?" he says proudly. "That's because it's been cooking all day long. It falls off the bone. It's so tender. But let's just say, it's not just the slow cooking, but the marinade that's the big secret to procuring a very spicy barbecue taste like that." "Where did you learn to cook like that?" I ask. "Alfonso here is in love with your food, and it's not just your food that is captivating his attention, I might add." "Would you believe it? I learned to cook from my grandmother. Growing up, I was always a hungry, skinny boy. The farmhouse where I grew up with my grandmother was just filled with these incredible smells that wafted all over the house. That woman could cook. She runs cooking classes, you know. People all over the world, between 3 or 8 people, book a week with my grandmother to learn the art of southern cuisine. They stay in her farmhouse for an entire week. If you enjoy cooking, you absolutely must go and book a week's course with her. You'll never ever regret it. No one ever does. She can teach you how to make the brisket and the delicious macaroni cheese that I served tonight. The courses aren't excessively expensive, but very worthwhile. It'll change the way you cook for life, and you'll learn about American food and our great classics." "Where does she live?" asked Alfonso curiously. "In Springdale. It's a town in Utah. It's where I grew up as a boy. The house is situated outside the boundaries of Zion National Park, which attracts tourists to Utah every year. People love going hiking there. The canyons are spectacular to observe." "More to the point," says Alfonso, surprising me by his directness. I'm wondering if he's flirting at this point, because it's about as brazenly audacious as you can get. But then again, subtlety is not always Alfonso's strong point. If you ask him to pick out a tie, it'll be the loudest tie you've ever seen, but definitely tasteful, as style is Alfonso's second name. "I'd like to go when you're going," he says presumptuously. I notice the chef's face flushes pink, but he likes Alfonso's directness, I think. As it happens, I'm going there next week, flying there, he says. I'll also be staying at the house. I could tell my grandmother that you would like to spend a week with her doing cookery. The afternoons will be free for you. I could show you around in the afternoons if you like. He hesitates. If you're serious, I can call her now. He looks quizzically at Alfonso. His blue eyes say nothing, but I can see the unwritten words, hear the unarticulated thoughts. For Marco's expression is as translucent and revealing as a Portuguese man of war. It's as if he's saying, "Bloody hell, I know you're gay, and you're married. What are you doing, bro? It's obvious you're flirting with me. Does your wife not know what's going on here?" Alfonso lets out a loud snort. "Married to her," he chuckles, pointing at me, as if the idea of being married to me is quite possibly the most hilarious suggestion that he's ever heard. I'm not sure exactly how to take that, especially when he rudely pipes, "Are you kidding? Never in a month of Sundays. Never would I marry Sue." Of course, I don't take offence with Alfonso. Sometimes he speaks before he thinks, and he hasn't got a mean bone in his body, but he has on occasion ruffled people by saying exactly what he thinks a little too freely. He can be completely tactless. That is not an understatement. "Thanks a lot, Alfonso. You make it sound as if the very idea of being married to me is appalling. Too appalling to contemplate. I'll have you know I'm actually quite a catch." "For a fisherman that likes his fish to swim one way with a heterosexual grace, then you're definitely a good catch," he says, giving Marcus a huge wink. "But I thought—" "Please," laughed Alfonso. "Do I look straight?" The chef laughs. "Not at all. That was the problem. But you did tell my waiter you were married. Do you make a habit of pretending to be married all the time?" "We're restaurant critics," whispers Alfonso under his breath. "I'm only telling you, as we shall be writing a great review about your restaurant, so there's no need for us to keep up the pretense." "Glad to hear it, but if I were you, I think I'd cut out the married act. I don't think anyone's seriously going to buy it, and if they do, it's only going to look bad on you, Sue. It's going to look like you are naive about your husband's real leanings. You are obviously so gay," he says to Alfonso. "It stands out a mile. So the two of you, I hope, will fly over to America next week. Join me at my grandmother's house. I would be very delighted if you would. Is that a deal? Are we on the same page?" "Absolutely," says Alfonso. "I'm paying for your tickets, Sue, so you better be coming, if you like it or not." "How can I refuse?" I say. So there you are, one night spent in a gourmet restaurant with my best friend Alfonso, pretending to be my husband, ends up with an unlikely encounter with an American chef called Marcus Black, who had subsequently invited us on a week's cookery course, where the mornings would be spent creating some southern dishes with his grandma in Utah, of all places. I knew the real attraction of the trip for both men was their clandestine immediate interest in each other. They were equally guarded about their feelings, as if they knew they were treading cautiously down a precarious, uncertain path when you don't know someone terribly well and are feeling the temperature of the water and getting acquainted with your bearings. Alfonso knew from hardened experience that attraction and chemistry were certainly not enough in a potential relationship. I think they both wanted to ensure that the road they were embarking upon was made up of smooth pebbles, not hostile glass fragments that could potentially cut your feet to shreds. The cookery course would be a seamless way for the two men to get to know each other better before the relationship, if indeed it became a relationship, developed into something much more serious. Let's just say there was always a risk. Things could potentially go pear-shaped between the two men. Even though Alfonso was in-your-face and effusive character, there was a reticent, reserved, self-effacing side to his character. He didn't do one-night stands or light-hearted flings. He was the type of man that was looking for a committed, enduring relationship. I knew, in this unassuming American chef, Marcus Black, he had sensed a connection between the two of them. Ostensibly, Alfonso had bountiful failed relationships behind him, so he was searching for stability in his life. I knew as his best friend I had to come along on this trip for good measure, so that should things fall apart, I could be a buffer for him. "I'm not going to get excited about this trip," he told me, "but you sense the chemistry between us. I'm looking forward to getting to know Marcus Black better, but I'm not going to rush anything. I've been burnt too many times." "Good for you. But don't get your hopes up, Alfonso. Chemistry is a good start, I admit, but you know it's not enough. It's like the kindling that gets the fire going, but if there's wet wood on the flames, the fire will burn out, and that could potentially be the two of you." "Don't I know it?" says Alfonso. "That's why you're coming along with me, Sue. I wouldn't have the guts to do this without you. I'm very grateful you're coming." A week later. This was my first trip to America. I had visited places in Europe, been to Asia, India and Africa, but I'd never been to America before. Of course, I was suffering from jet lag, but when I arrived in the town of Springdale, I was completely enchanted. Visiting America was like climbing out of a tight pair of jeans that you never knew were restrictive until you put on a looser pair. You suddenly breathe again. You feel less trussed up, more comfortable in the baggier pair, as if you can almost do anything you desire without the claustrophobic restriction of a clinging fabric squeezing you so tightly. You look back at your cramped jeans with a realization that they were much more compact than you actually realized. The tight jeans are England, with its much more narrow, confined scenery, cute little country lanes and fields, whereas America just feels so vast. You feel as if you're in a place that's so large it stretches back for miles, while the scenery in Utah will quite literally take your breath away. I was welcomed to the undulating, sweeping twists of the canyons, with sheer mountain drops, ridges, spirals and butts that arrested the skyline in a magisterial dominance that demands your respect, your focus, intrigue, and reverential awe. If you think of your archetype Western movie, you might think of Utah, with its vast stretches of sandy desert, deep, treacherous canyons that invite your admiration to venture on its own voyage of discovery. For there is nothing reticent, retiring, or reserved about these masterful backdrops and towering red rocks that inspire the intrepid explorer within you to make its appearance known. Let's just say in the developed areas of this space, where houses nestle like tiny matchboxes beneath the mountains, there is a green belt of mowed lawns, bountiful trees of many kinds, standing out so vibrantly against the tan and red rugged contours of the mountains. But by contrast, everything looks so small to those mountains. I was to find that the town here gave off a contagious, convivial energy, and I couldn't help but feel that it would be very difficult to be depressed here. How can you look at such extraordinary beauty and be downhearted? Mrs. Black, Marcus's grandmother, lived in a house that was surrounded by the sheer awesome wonders of Zion National Park. On the day we arrived at her house, the mountains were blurred by a foggy haze that transformed them into a faint bluish-purple colour. The house was situated on over an acre of land, almost steps away from the Virgin River, which is a tributary of the Colorado River. The house is a double-storey symmetrical farmhouse, painted in a deep apricot colour that blends perfectly with the bronze colours of the canyons. It has large windows, balconies on the highest level, and a standard grey slate roof, surrounded by fields of sagebrush and tall shrubland, while the land itself is splattered with cottonwoods, mixed conifers, spruce firs, junipers, mixed pines. Mrs. Black came out to greet us warmly, as if she'd known us all our lives, as her friendliness was so charged by a natural nurturing spirit. Suffice to say, the moment that Alfonso and Marco saw each other again, it was even more electric than at the restaurant that day in Mayfair. For a moment they were almost too shy to embrace each other. Needless to say, they cordially shook hands, and Mrs. Black gave me a knowing wink, She took me discreetly to one side and said, "I've never seen Marcus like this before. He was most insistent that I invite the both of you on this cookery course together. I've never known him to be so pushy about anything. But let's just say I smelt a rat, and now I can see it," she says, looking at Alfonso, giggling happily. "I like him," she says to me. "I really like him." He's a good man, I admit. A bit over the top, but that's part of his charm. Yet underneath it all, he's quite a sensitive man. I think Alfonso is quite smitten by your grandson. He was in love with his cooking before he even met him. "I worry about my grandson," says Mrs. Black. "He's been hurt in so many of his relationships before. It's been the history of his life. People he trusted letting him down again and again. He never knew who his father was, but my daughter, his mother, let's just say, is a free spirit who's never been responsible a day in her life. Over the years we got random phone calls from her, but Marcus never met her. He still hasn't. It's easy to take it personally when your own mother has never bothered to get in contact with you over the years, or even pay you a fleeting visit. I mean, who does that? He'd say it didn't bother him at all, but I know it did. Marcus is a very sensitive soul under it all. He's not interested in casual relationships. It's a bit like that with Alfonso, I say to her. I do hope it works out for the two of them. I really do. Let's just say learning to cook all this American food was phenomenal, as Marcus's grandmother made the inspirational cooking so much fun. I noticed Alfonso and Marcus were spending a lot of spare time together, visiting coffee shops, cafes, and even having dinner together at restaurants in town. I gave them the space to go off and do their own thing. To put it mildly, I'd never seen Alfonso radiate so much happiness before. I knew he was falling hard for Marcus, and the American chef seemed to be walking with a skip to his step. So let's just say a smouldering romance appeared to be brewing on the horizon. One night in the farmhouse, where I slept in a cosy, well-appointed bedroom on the second floor, which was air-conditioned, because let's say Utah in the summer months can be scorchingly hot. It was an attractive, airy room, painted in a neutral colour, with a large sliding door that opened out onto a wrought iron balcony, with pretty views over the countryside. On this occasion I am awoken with a start. I'm not sure why. I'm normally a deep sleeper. The temperature in my room was absolutely perfect, but I had a funny feeling that something was off, that warranted my investigation. I'm not sure where the strange feeling came from. I'm not exactly instinctive. It's like sensing there's an intruder in the house or something. I ambled out of my bed, putting on my dressing gown and slippers, and decided I would warm myself some hot milk. I was being completely ridiculous, I know, irrational and nonsensical. I must have dreamt something, I thought, that I hadn't remembered, that had provoked within me an attack of the heebie-jeebies. Of course, that must be it. I told myself quite sternly to pull myself together. I trundled down the long sweeping staircase towards the kitchen, switching on the light, and that's when I heard a clattering sound coming from outside the kitchen door that made me believe something or someone is ferreting around in the bin outside. Mrs. Black had told me all about the raccoons and how annoying they could sometimes be when they rummage in your dustbins. But she also commented that on occasion black bears had wandered onto her property to go through the dustbins, as sometimes she throws out leftovers, and the bears have a great sense of smell and are highly attracted to the food offerings. I think Mrs. Black thought I knew all about bears and how they behaved. She was rather presumptuous like that. I may be well educated, but I don't really know a lot about bears. Growing up, I'd always associated them with cuddly toys that you took to bed with you. I even had an antique collection of bears at home, so in my mind's eye, my attitude to bears was not as guarded as it possibly should have been. I find a torch on the kitchen windowsill and quickly open up the back door. The moonlight is spectacular tonight, a round, circular, luminescent face that smiles through the sky, saddling its light across the horizon, so the night has a lightness to it, while the stars twinkle brightly from the firmament with a vibrancy I've never seen before. I hear the loud clattering sound again, and what appears to be a very frustrated grunt that reminds me of the sound of a child having a tantrum because he's being served baked beans for dinner yet again. Now that grunting sound has made me very curious. I decide it's got to come from a bear, but this I have to see for myself. Bear in mind, we don't have bears loitering in our backyards in Britain. If we want to see a bear in England, we need to plan a visit to the zoo. So for me, this was an experience of note. I switch off my torchlight and creep cautiously out into the backyard, gliding against the wall and attaching myself to it like a limpet, to remain as obscure as I possibly can. I am now facing the semicircular driveway. I can see the carport clearly, where 2 trucks, a red Dodge Viper that belongs to Marcus Black and a white Ford Taurus that belongs to his grandmother, are parked stoically together. I notice the large bin is standing up beside the carport, and what appears to be a great big bear is literally throwing out all the garbage in the bin over a giant-sized shoulder to the ground below, going through it with a fine tooth comb, as if searching for a tasty morsel to eat. I imagine this bin is often filled with tasty food. The previous day Mrs. Black had thrown out over a dozen day-old cinnamon buns that had passed their best, but they were still delicious, I imagine. Mrs. Black's kitchen always reeks of the pleasant aromas of her amazing food, that not only waft over her house, but I'm certain the scent could be picked up by a hungry bear a mile away. The bear slams the bin shut, impressively scooping up all the spilled contents from the ground right back into the bin again. Now, what bear would be so neat, so conspicuously tidy, so conscientious? It seemed like odd behaviour to me for a bear. I couldn't help thinking that this creature was large for a bear, standing up on 2 feet. The creature's gait was so straight, his deportment graceful, but his silhouette so human-like. But then what did I know? I was no expert on bears. That was when I hear a whistle, and another bear emerges from the shadows. It's indicating to the larger creature that was ferreting in the bin, as if to say, "Come here, look what I've found." The 2 creatures are standing outside Mrs. Black's white Ford Taurus and appear to have opened the trunk. Then I remember that Mrs. Black had left some groceries in the back of the trunk, the non-perishables, when she'd been distracted by a phone call yesterday. I think she accidentally left them overnight, possibly forgetting about them, because with bears out there, they would happily grab onto that food. The trunk was slightly ajar, and the creatures begin to rummage excitedly through the plastic bags of groceries, chattering enthusiastically together. Then I hear them talking. I know that this cannot be a bear. Bears don't talk. They don't chat like this. Also, the creatures are taking care to keep their voices very quiet. The creatures are selective about what they're taking. The large creature fumbles with a jar of peanut butter, opening up the lid, as if he's actually done this before. They both smell the jar, and thick fingers submerge themselves in this sumptuous gooey treat, and I can hear the oohs and ahs of appreciation as they gobble it all up. But these creatures, they're not bears. I've noticed thick sausage-like fingers tucking into the peanut butter. Bears don't have fingers. I can't see the creatures as clearly as I would like to, even though the moonlight has graciously made the sky less tenebrous. I don't want to shine my torch in these creatures' faces, but I do want to see what they are. I'm so confounded by what I'm observing. These creatures appear intelligent. They're talking in a strange language, or putting a few items into one of the bags, and for some reason the torch I'd been carrying just falls to the ground, crashing onto the paving with a loud, thunderous smash. I am now terrified. The creatures both stop eating at once. They look at each other as if startled by the noise. Before I can quickly retreat to the kitchen, the 2 creatures are standing yards away from me, staring at me with astonishment in their bright yellow eyes. I don't know who is more surprised, me in seeing them, or them in seeing me. These creatures are tall, lofty, majestic, insanely large. So much so that I feel tiny in their presence. They have pyramid-shaped heads, human faces, overlong arms, and are easily about 8 foot tall, and 4 foot wide across the shoulders. One is male, the other female, as the female has breasts. What the hell are they? I've never been so terrified in all of my life. My heart is thumping, my legs wobbling, my hair is standing up on the back of my neck. I feel overwhelmed with terror. I must have passed out and fainted, as I remember nothing after that. My memory just goes completely blank. The next thing I know is someone is shaking me wide awake. I open my eyes to find myself lying on the outdoor sofa of the wraparound porch. It's early morning, and the pretty sunlight is filtering through the sky. The birds are tweeting. I feel disorientated and very confused. "What are you doing sleeping out on the porch?" asked Mrs. Black, looking concerned. I look a little bemused. "I'm not exactly sure," I say. "I can't remember." Mrs. Black looks down at my empty bottle of peanut butter by my side, along with an empty packet of walnuts, and she looks at me in horror. "Oh my God, I'm not feeding you enough," she says, sounding appalled. "You came out here last night to eat the groceries in the back of my truck. Were you that hungry? You should have told me, dear, rather than sneaking to my truck for a midnight feast. A small thing like you, I didn't think you'd eat that much. But I'm so sorry. I had no clue you were starving like this. I'm clearly a dreadful, dreadful host." I glance down at the empty peanut butter bottle and the walnut packet that is scrunched by my side, and my face grows bright red, as if I've been caught doing something red-handed. I look as guilty as sin. What must Mrs. Black actually think of me? I abandoned my perfectly comfortable bed last night to apparently sleep outside on this porch. I then sneaked to her open trunk to retrieve a bottle of peanut butter and a packet of walnuts, and I have a midnight feast. Goodness gracious, she must think I'm the weirdest guest. I wanted to tell Mrs. Black about my strange encounter with these curious creatures, who must have carried me to the couch after I fainted from shock, and placed the empty bottle of peanut butter and walnuts at my side. But how can I tell her what I'd seen? I'm still struggling to get my head around it myself, and I'm not exactly sure if I told anyone about my idiosyncratic encounter, whether they'd actually believe me or not. For me it had been so surreal, like an outlandish dream. But I knew that this had happened, and after much research, I discovered the two creatures I encountered are known as Bigfoot. Suffice to say, after Mrs. Black had observed the evidence of my so-called nightly binge, where she perceived I had pilfered some groceries from her half-open trunk to fill a malnourished stomach, groaning with hunger, she began to pile my plate so high with food that even Alfonso commented on the size of my portions.
"Mrs. Black, Sue is a very small woman. Why are you giving me and Marcus normal portions of food? But Sue's food looks like you've placed Mount Everest on her plate."
Mrs. Black looked at Alfonso earnestly and said, "Son, Sue is a very hungry girl." Needless to say, I ate everything up to avoid offending Mrs. Black, but I paid for it big time. I rolled back to England like a small hippopotamus, bursting in my clothes that could barely contain me anymore, only to discover my bathroom scales informed me I'd put on 1/2 stone, which is 10 pounds in 7 days. To cut a long story short, Alfonso and Marcus are now happily married, so their relationship stood the test of time. I believe the experience I had in America happened to me because I've always been so cynical. The universe was showing me, wake up, young lady. There's much more to this world than you could ever imagine. And I profoundly believe this is true. So there you are. This is my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.